After my son's death, his wife, with a gleam in her eyes, proudly declared, "Now that the money bag is dead, I will inherit $100 million, and you, old pensioner, will be left with empty pockets." She laughed as if she had won the lottery, imagining revenge for all the insults. But when the lawyer came in to read the will, his words, "Get out, you have no business here," and one sentence turned her triumph into an abyss of justice, where betrayal turned into shame. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The phone shattered my morning like a brick through glass. I'd been standing at the kitchen counter, coffee halfway to my lips, watching March sunlight crawl across the tile. The ringing seemed louder than it should have been. My hand trembled as I set the cup down and grabbed my cell. Loretta's name glowed on the screen. "Morton, Brent died last night." Her voice was flat, clinical, like she was reading a grocery list, not announcing that my son, my only son, was gone. "What? What happened? I just spoke to him 2 days ago." "Heart stopped. The cancer. I have arrangements to make." Click. She hung up, just like that. No apology, no tears, no space for my questions. I stood there holding the phone, staring at the blank screen, my coffee forgotten and cooling. Brent had sounded weak when we'd talked, sure, but stable. The doctors had said months, maybe more. How could he just be gone? I packed with shaking hands. Underwear, shirt, toiletries thrown into an overnight bag. On my dresser sat a framed photo. Brent at 25, grinning on graduation day, his arm around my shoulders. I picked it up, remembering his voice from the hospital 2 weeks ago. "Dad, I'll beat this thing. I'm not done yet." But he was done, and I hadn't been there. The drive from my place in the suburbs to the San Diego estate took 45 minutes, though it felt like hours. I kept hitting redial through the car's speakers, listening to Loretta's voicemail message play over and over. Professional, distant. "Leave a message after the tone." "Loretta, it's me again. Please call me back. I need to know what happened. Was he alone? Did he say anything? I'm on my way. We need to plan the funeral together." Nothing. The calls went straight to voicemail, one after another. Each unanswered ring tightened the knot in my chest. Why wouldn't she answer? What was so urgent that she couldn't give me 5 minutes to talk about our son? I pulled onto the familiar street just after 9. The estate rose ahead, the house Brent had built with his software money, all modern angles and glass. I'd spent Thanksgivings there, birthdays, watched my grandson take his first steps on that lawn. But something was wrong. The wrought iron gate stood partially closed, narrowed to barely a person's width. Normally, Loretta left it open for family. I parked on the street, walked through the gap. 2 cars sat in the circular driveway, Loretta's white BMW and an unfamiliar black sedan. I didn't recognize it. Who was here? The front door opened before I reached it. Loretta stood in the threshold, blocking the entrance. She wore dark jeans and a cream sweater, her blonde hair pulled back tight. No tears, no redness around her eyes. She looked at me the way you'd look at a delivery man who'd arrived at an inconvenient time. "Loretta?" I moved to embrace her, to share this impossible grief, but she stepped back, crossed her arms. The message was clear. "Morton, don't make yourself too comfortable here. You came. That's enough already." I stopped, stared at her. "Loretta, he was my son. I need to see him. I need to understand." "There's nothing to understand. He's gone." "Where is he? Is he still inside? I want to sit with him." "The funeral home already picked him up. I handled it." "Without telling me? Without letting me say goodbye?" She shifted her weight, impatient. Behind her, I could see into the living room. Brent's Eames chair, his collection of vintage electronics on the shelves, the photographs of our family. My family. But she stood there like a sentry, denying me access to my own son's home. "You'll get your chance at the funeral. That's in 3 days. I'll text you the details." She started to close the door, actually started to close it with me standing right there on the porch. "Loretta, what's going on here? Why are you acting like—" "Like what, Morton?" Her eyes hardened. "Like I'm in charge now? Because I am." The door shut, not slammed, That would have been too emotional. Just a firm, final click of the latch. I stood there on the porch, staring at the polished wood, feeling the March wind cut through my jacket. Behind me, the black sedan sat in the driveway like a question mark. Above me, the sky stretched blue and indifferent. Inside, my son's belongings surrounded a woman who'd just shut me out of his death like I was a stranger. My prosecutor instincts stirred, dormant for 15 years since retirement, but still there, muscle memory kicking in. Something was wrong. Legally wrong. Emotionally wrong. I turned slowly, walked back down the drive, pulled out my phone. This time I wasn't calling Loretta. I scrolled through my contacts, found a name I hadn't called in months. Richard Moss, my former colleague, still practicing estate law. If Loretta had arranged body pickup, made funeral plans, taken control, she must have legal documents, a will, power of attorney, something, and I was going to find out what. The gate stood partially closed behind me as I reached the street. I looked back at the house one more time. In an upper window, Brent's old office, I saw movement, a shadow passing. Loretta probably already back to whatever business she'd been conducting with whoever owned that black sedan. I hit dial. Richard answered on the second ring. "Morton? Long time. What's going on?" I kept my voice steady, years of courtroom control holding me together. "My son died last night. His wife is acting strange, blocking me out, won't answer questions. I need advice on estate procedures. How fast can someone take control of a body? Make arrangements before family members are notified?" A pause. "Morton, I'm sorry for your loss, but that's unusual. Legally, she has standing as spouse, but the speed you're describing raises questions. When can we meet?" "Today," I said. "Now, if possible. Come to my office. 1 hour." I drove away from the estate, watching it shrink in my rearview mirror. Brent was in there somewhere. Not his body, not anymore, but his life, his possessions, his truth. And Loretta was standing guard over all of it, keeping me out with a closed door and a cold smile. But I'd spent 30 years as a prosecutor. I knew how to find the truth when people were hiding it. I knew how to dig through lies until the foundation cracked. Loretta had made her first mistake this morning. She'd shown her hand too early, been too cold, too quick to shut me out. Guilty people always made that mistake. They moved too fast, too decisively, revealing that they had something to protect. I didn't know what she was hiding yet, but I was going to find out. The 3 days between that closed door and the funeral passed like a bad dream. I called Loretta 6 times, 6 times straight to voicemail. I called Brent's oncologist, who confirmed what I already knew. The cancer was aggressive, but Brent had been stable just days before his death. "Sometimes they take sudden turns," she'd said, professional sympathy in her voice. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Flores." I spent those nights in my home, surrounded by photographs of Brent as a boy, as a young man building his first startup, as the son who used to call me every Sunday, until Loretta entered his life 2 years ago. Then the calls became monthly, then occasional, then rare. Richard had given me basic estate information. As surviving spouse, Loretta had legal authority to make arrangements, but he'd also said something that stuck with me. "If you suspect impropriety, document everything. Save every text, every email, every interaction. Truth leaves traces." Then came the funeral. I arrived at the Bayview Memorial Chapel at 10 on March 18th. The parking lot was already half full. Inside, the viewing room smelled of lilies and furniture polish. And there was Loretta, at the center of a cluster of people I didn't recognize, her hand touching someone's arm sympathetically, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Even from across the room, I could see the performance. I'd watched enough witnesses over 30 years to know manufactured emotion from real grief. She wore a black designer dress, probably cost more than my monthly pension. Her makeup was perfect, just enough to suggest tears without ruining the effect. She glanced up, saw me, and her expression didn't change. No acknowledgement, no greeting. She simply turned back to her audience. I scanned the room. 40, maybe 50 people, most of them strangers. Then I spotted familiar faces in the back corner. Tom Reichert and Sam Oladipo, Brent's college roommates, his business partners in those early startup days. They stood apart from Loretta's crowd, talking quietly between themselves, looking uncomfortable. The service started at 10:30. We filed into the chapel, took our seats. I sat in the second row at my own son's funeral, because Loretta had filled the first row with her friends. The casket sat closed at the front, dark mahogany, covered in white roses. Brent was in there, my boy, and I hadn't even seen him one last time. The funeral director spoke briefly. Then Loretta approached the podium. She gripped the edges, let her head drop for a moment, as if gathering strength. When she looked up, tears glistened on her cheeks. "Brent was my everything," she began, her voice breaking perfectly on the last word. "We built a life together, a business together, dreams together. He fought so hard, and I was by his side every single moment." I watched her hands on the podium, steady, controlled. His final words to me were, "Take care of everything, my love, and I will. I promise him I will. My love." Brent never called anyone my love. He'd say babe or sweetheart when he was being affectionate, but never my love. That wasn't his language. But no one else in this room would know that. They were buying every word. Loretta continued for 5 more minutes. Stories of their life together, his supposed devotion to her, their shared vision. When she stepped down, she touched her eyes with the tissue again. I watched carefully. The tears were gone within seconds. Real grief doesn't evaporate like that. Real grief lingers, ambushes you in waves. This was something else. After the service, guests moved to the reception area. Platters of sandwiches, coffee urns, quiet conversations. I needed air. I stepped outside to the covered walkway, loosened my tie, breathed. Through the window, I could see into a small side room. Loretta stood alone for a moment, checking her phone. Her face relaxed, a slight smile, not sadness, something else. Satisfaction, maybe. Amusement. Then someone entered the room and her grief mask snapped back into place, instantly, seamlessly. I walked back inside. Tom and Sam found me near the coffee station. "Mr. Flores?" Tom gripped my hand. "We're so sorry. He was the best of us." "Thank you, Tom. I appreciate you both coming." Sam leaned closer, keeping his voice low. "Sir, can we talk? Privately? There's something—" He glanced toward Loretta across the room. "Something we think you should know about." Before I could respond, Loretta's voice cut through the conversations like a knife. "Morton, you don't need to worry about these things." She'd appeared beside us, seemingly from nowhere. She wasn't looking at Tom and Sam. She was looking at me, her smile sharp. "You're retired, old pensioner. Let those of us who actually knew Brent handle this." The room got quieter. People turning, listening. Old pensioner. She'd said it loud enough for everyone to hear, reducing me to some doddering irrelevance who didn't understand his own son. Tom opened his mouth to say something, but I touched his arm. "Not here. Not now. I wouldn't give her the scene she wanted." "I was just offering my condolences to Brent's friends," I said evenly. "Of course." Her tone was sugar-sweet poison. "That's very kind. But I'm managing the reception arrangements. You can relax. Enjoy the sandwiches." She turned to Tom and Sam, dismissing me entirely. "Thank you both for coming. Brent would have appreciated it." I walked away, found a corner, let the anger settle before it showed on my face. Around me, people ate sandwiches, spoke in hushed tones, performed the rituals of sympathy. Loretta moved through them like a politician at a fundraiser, touching hands, accepting condolences, her performance flawless. An hour later, as guests started drifting toward the exits, I intercepted her near the chapel entrance. I kept my voice low, conversational, but I needed answers. "Loretta, we need to discuss Brent's will, his final wishes. I was his father." She pulled her arm away. I hadn't even been touching her, with exaggerated force, as if I'd grabbed her roughly. Several people turned to look. "Brent left everything to me," she said, loud enough for those nearby to hear clearly. "The house, the business, everything. You're not needed here. Don't you understand? He wouldn't have, but he did. Accept it." She turned to a nearby couple, her voice immediately softening. "Excuse me, grief makes people behave strangely, doesn't it?" I stood there, watching her walk away, resume her performance. The couple glanced at me with pity, not for my loss, but for my apparent confusion, my elderly inability to accept reality. But I wasn't confused, not anymore. I was seeing clearly for the first time since that phone call. She wasn't just grieving differently. She was celebrating, and she wanted me to know it, wanted me to feel powerless, excluded, diminished. Old pensioner, not needed here. I pulled out my phone, walked outside to the parking lot. The March afternoon was bright and cold. In my contacts, I found another name, Elena Vasquez, a private investigator I'd worked with on fraud cases years ago. If she was still working, still sharp, she could find things that lawyers and estate procedures couldn't. The phone rang twice before she answered. "Morton Flores. Now there's a name I haven't heard in forever. How's retirement treating you?" "It's not," I said. "I need your help. My son just died, and his wife is hiding something. I don't know what yet, but I need to find out." A pause. Then, "Tell me everything." I did. The cold phone call, the closed door, the funeral performance, the will claim, everything that had happened since that morning 3 days ago. Elena listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, "Morton, if she's lying about the will contents, we'll find out. If she's hiding assets, we'll find them. But I need you to understand something. If we go digging and find what you're afraid we'll find, it's going to hurt. Are you ready for that?" I looked back at the chapel. Through the glass doors I could see Loretta still working the room, still performing, still convinced she'd won. "I'm ready," I said. "I want the truth, whatever it is." "Then we start tomorrow. Come to my office. Bring everything, texts, emails, any documents you have. We'll build a timeline of what really happened." I ended the call, stood in the parking lot as the last guests filtered out. Tom and Sam emerged, spotted me, walked over. "Mr. Flores," Sam said quietly. "What we wanted to tell you earlier. Brent called me 2 weeks ago. He was worried about money. Said some accounts weren't adding up, that Loretta was being evasive when he asked questions. He was going to look into it after his next treatment cycle. But then he died." I finished. Tom nodded. "We didn't want to say anything at the funeral, but you should know. Something wasn't right. Brent knew it too." They left. I stood alone in the parking lot, watching the sun drop toward the horizon. Inside that chapel, my son's body lay in a closed casket, already claimed by a funeral home Loretta had selected, already being prepared for burial in a plot she'd chosen, already wrapped in arrangements I'd had no part in. But Brent had been suspicious, had been asking questions, had been worried about money, and then his heart had stopped, suddenly, conveniently. I got in my car, started the engine, but didn't drive away yet. Instead, I sat there, letting my prosecutor mind work through what I knew, what I suspected, what I needed to prove. Loretta claimed she'd inherited everything. She'd shut me out immediately. She'd performed grief like a professional actress. She'd called me an old pensioner in front of witnesses, establishing a narrative of my incompetence, my irrelevance. But she'd made mistakes. She'd been too cold too fast. She'd revealed too much satisfaction, and she'd underestimated me. I was 68 years old, retired for 15 years, living on a pension in a suburban house. To her, I was exactly what she'd called me, an old man, powerless, irrelevant, easy to dismiss. She had no idea that I'd spent 3 decades taking apart liars piece by piece, exposing frauds, proving cases that seemed impossible. She didn't know that I'd never lost a major prosecution, never backed down from a fight, never stopped until I'd found every shred of truth. She thought she'd won. But the fight hadn't even started yet. I pulled out of the parking lot, drove home through the fading afternoon light. Tomorrow I'd meet with Elena. Tomorrow we'd start digging, and somewhere in the debris of my son's death, we'd find what Loretta was hiding. Because she was hiding something. I knew it the way I'd always known when a witness was lying on the stand, not from the words, but from the spaces between them, from the things left unsaid, from the performance that was just a little too perfect. Brent had been asking questions about money. Then Brent had died, and now Loretta was in control of everything, shutting out anyone who might ask those same questions. That wasn't grief. That was strategy, and I was going to dismantle it. The call came as I sat in my car outside the funeral home, watching the last guests leave. The funeral director's voice was apologetic. "Mr. Flores, I should have mentioned, the will reading is tonight, 6 o'clock at the estate. The attorney requested all family members attend." I checked my watch. I had 40 minutes. I needed coffee. I needed to think. I drove to the nearest cafe, ordered something I didn't drink, and tried to prepare myself for whatever Loretta had planned next. Because that's what this was. Another performance. Another humiliation. She wanted an audience when she claimed everything Brent had built. Fine. Let her have her moment. I arrived at the estate at 5:50. The front door stood open this time, not like this morning when she'd blocked my entry. I could hear voices inside, see people moving in the living room. I walked through the foyer, my shoes quiet on the marble Brent had imported from Italy. The living room had been arranged like a small courtroom. Chairs formed rows facing a mahogany desk, where an older man in a gray suit organized papers from a leather briefcase. 8 or 9 people sat scattered across the seats, faces I recognized from the funeral. Loretta's friends mostly, a distant cousin of Brent's I hadn't seen in years. And there was Loretta, seated in Brent's favorite chair, the leather recliner he'd brought from his first apartment, the one he'd refused to replace even when the leather cracked. She sat in it like a throne, her black dress replaced with a different outfit, makeup freshly applied. She looked rested, triumphant. She saw me enter and smiled, not the grief mask from earlier, a real smile, sharp and satisfied. "Everyone," she announced, her voice carrying across the room. "Let's be clear about what happens now." The conversation stopped. People turned. "Now that the money bag is dead," she paused, letting those words land. Money bag, her term for her dead husband. "I'll inherit the 100 million, the business, this house, everything Brent and I built together." She stood, pointed directly at me. "And Morton here? You'll be left with empty pockets. You can start packing your things, old man. Maybe find a retirement home that fits your budget." A few uncomfortable glances. One of her friends touched her arm, whispered something. Loretta ignored it. The attorney cleared his throat. "Mrs. Flores, perhaps we should—" "I'm just being honest, Robert. Everyone should know how things stand." She sat back down, arranging herself in Brent's chair, waiting. Robert Carmichael, I'd learned his name from the funeral director, was 70-something with silver hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent 50 years in courtrooms. He looked at Loretta with an expression I recognized from my own prosecutor days, the look you give someone who's about to receive very bad news. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering on this difficult day. I am Robert Carmichael, attorney for the estate of Brent Michael Flores. I will now read the last will and testament, executed on February 28th, 2025, and properly witnessed according to California law." He opened the sealed envelope with deliberate precision, pulled out several pages, adjusted his reading glasses. Then he looked directly at Loretta. "Mrs. Flores, please leave this room. You have no business here." Silence. Complete, total silence. Loretta laughed. A confused, uncertain sound. "Excuse me. This is my house. I'm his wife. You're not named in this will. Please leave so I can proceed with the reading." Her face went through a visible transformation. Smile to confusion to disbelief. "That's impossible." "Nevertheless," Carmichael gestured to the door, "this is a private reading for beneficiaries and witnesses only." "I am the beneficiary. Robert, what are you—" She looked around the room, seeking support, finding only uncomfortable stares. "This is absurd. Morton, what did you do? What did you tell him?" I said nothing. I couldn't have spoken if I'd wanted to. My throat had closed, my heart hammering. Carmichael continued, his voice flat and professional. I'm going to proceed with the reading. Mrs. Flores, you may remain if you wish, but you will not interrupt. He began reading. I, Brent Michael Flores, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this my last will and testament. To my father, Morton Flores, I leave my entire estate, including Flores Medtech Corporation, all real property, all financial accounts, and all personal property, with the exception of items specifically bequeathed to others. The words hung in the air. I couldn't process them, couldn't make them make sense. Loretta's face had gone white. She stood slowly from the chair, swaying slightly. This is fraud, she whispered, then louder. This is fraud! He manipulated Brent, poisoned his mind when he was weak and dying. Brent would never do this to me. Never! She lunged toward me. One of the guests grabbed her arm, stopping her. You'll pay for this, Morton. I'll take you to court and prove you're nothing but a manipulative old thief who took advantage of a sick man. You turned him against me. You isolated him. You... Mrs. Flores. Carmichael's voice cut through her screaming. You need to leave. Now, or I'll call security. An assistant, a young woman I hadn't noticed before, moved to Loretta's side, took her elbow. Loretta jerked away, but the assistant persisted, guiding her firmly toward the door. This isn't over, Loretta's voice echoed from the hallway. I'll destroy you, Morton. I'll take everything. You'll regret this. The front door slammed. Through the window, I watched her storm to her BMW, engine roaring as she reversed down the driveway too fast, tires squealing. The room remained silent. Carmichael continued reading, small bequests to charities, personal items to old friends, procedures for the business transition. I heard the words without comprehending them. People began leaving quietly, murmuring condolences, avoiding eye contact. Within 15 minutes, the room had emptied except for Carmichael, his assistant, and me. I sat in one of the chairs, staring at my hands. Carmichael approached, holding the will document. Mr. Flores, we need to talk. Privately. There's something your son wanted me to tell you. I followed him through the house, past family photos on the walls, past the kitchen where Brent used to make his elaborate Sunday breakfasts, past the staircase where he'd fallen and broken his arm at age 12. Carmichael opened the door to Brent's study. The room smelled like my son, coffee and electronics, and the specific cologne he'd worn since college. His computer sat dark on the desk. Books lined the shelves. A framed photo showed Brent at 30, cutting the ribbon at his company's first office. Carmichael closed the door behind us. Sit down, Mr. Flores. What I'm about to tell you won't be easy to hear. I sat in the chair facing the desk. Carmichael remained standing, still holding the will. Your son came to me 5 weeks ago. February 23rd. He was weak, the cancer was progressing, but his mind was sharp and angry. He told me he'd discovered something about his wife. Something that required immediate action. My chest tightened. He didn't show me proof. Said he was still gathering it. Didn't want to act until he was certain. But he suspected Loretta was having an affair. And he'd found irregularities in the business accounts. Transfers he hadn't authorized. Money moving to accounts he didn't recognize. How much money? He didn't say, but enough to alarm him. Enough to change his will immediately before he had all the facts. He said if something happened to him before he could prove it, you would need to know. You would need to investigate. I stared at the photo of Brent on the wall. He didn't tell me any of this. He wanted to be sure first. He said you'd taught him that. Never make accusations without evidence. He was collecting that evidence when... Carmichael paused. When his heart stopped. Suddenly. Conveniently. Mr. Flores, I'm an attorney, not a detective. But I've handled enough estates to know when something feels wrong. And this feels very wrong. Loretta's reaction tonight wasn't surprise. It was fury at being caught. Whatever your son suspected, I believe it was true. He placed the will on the desk between us. You're the executor now. You have legal authority to examine everything. Business records, personal accounts, all of it. If there's evidence of wrongdoing, you'll find it. And if you find it, he met my eyes, you'll know what to do with it. I picked up the will. Scan the text. February 28th, less than 3 weeks before Brent died. She'll fight this, I said. Of course she will. She'll claim undue influence, mental incompetency, manipulation. She'll drag you through probate court for years if she can. Carmichael pulled a business card from his jacket, set it on the desk. You'll need a good estate attorney, not me. I'm the executor's counsel. I represent the estate itself. But this woman, Elizabeth Wright, she's the best in San Diego for contested wills. I took the card, looked at it without reading it. One more thing, Carmichael said quietly. Your son's last words to me when he signed this will. He said, if something happens to me, make sure my father knows I trusted him. Make sure he knows I'm sorry for letting her come between us. Those were his exact words. My throat closed completely. I nodded, unable to speak. Carmichael left, closing the door softly behind him. I sat alone in Brent's study, holding the will, breathing in the fading scent of my son, and feeling the weight of what he'd left me. Not just money, not just property, but a mission. Find out what she did. Prove it. Make it right. Loretta had called me an old man, a powerless pensioner, someone to dismiss and humiliate. She had no idea what she'd just started. The week after the will reading passed in strange suspension, I stayed at my suburban home, not the estate. It felt wrong to move into Brent's house while everything remained so unsettled. Carmichael had explained some of it in that private meeting in Brent's study. My son suspected Loretta was unfaithful, had discovered irregularities in the business accounts. He didn't have proof, Carmichael said, but he had enough suspicion to protect his assets. He wanted you to have everything because he knew she'd take it all and destroy what he'd built. But suspicion wasn't proof, and now I was executor of an estate under attack. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, March 25th. I knew what it was before I opened it. The law firm name across the top, Blank and Associates. David Blank. I remembered him from my prosecutor days. Aggressive, ruthless, the kind of attorney who'd argue black was white if his client paid enough. The complaint was 47 pages. I sat at my kitchen table and read. Plaintiff alleges that defendant Morton Flores, taking advantage of his position as father to the deceased, deliberately isolated Brent Flores from his spouse, manipulated the deceased during periods of extreme physical and mental vulnerability, and exercised undue influence to redirect the estate away from its rightful beneficiary. Rightful beneficiary. She actually wrote that. The accusations went on, page after page. Elder abuse, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, interference with marital relations, fraud. Each paragraph was a knife, precise and meant to wound. I set the document down, picked up my phone. Before I could decide who to call, it rang. Tom Reichert, Brent's old college friend. Morton, I thought you should know. Loretta's been talking. She's telling everyone you were abusive to Brent, that you turned him against her, that you manipulated everything. I closed my eyes. None of that is true. I know. I knew Brent. But not everyone did. She's convincing to people who only knew her version. After Tom hung up, I sat staring at the complaint. This was her strategy. Legal pressure combined with social destruction. Attack my reputation, make me seem like the villain, force me to settle just to make it stop. I spent the next 2 days researching estate attorneys. My prosecutor experience was criminal law. I knew courtrooms, but not probate disputes. I needed someone who specialized in exactly this kind of fight. Elizabeth Wright's name appeared in 3 different cases. A contested will where a stepmother had tried to disinherit biological children. An elder abuse claim against a caretaker. A complex estate dispute that made the local news. She'd won all 3. I called her office Wednesday afternoon. Wright and Associates, how may I help you? My name is Morton Flores. I need to speak with Ms. Wright about an estate matter. A will contest. Ms. Wright is in court this week, but she has an opening Thursday at 2. Would that work? Yes. Thank you. Thursday morning, I gathered everything. The will, medical records showing Brent's mental competency in late February, notes from my visits during his illness, Carmichael's summary of Brent's suspicions. I drove downtown to the address on Elizabeth's website. The office was a converted Victorian house on a quiet street, painted cream with dark green trim, professional, but not corporate. I arrived 15 minutes early, sat in my car composing myself. At precisely 2 o'clock, I climbed the porch steps and entered. The interior was all dark wood and built-in bookshelves, cases lining the walls. A receptionist directed me to the second floor. Elizabeth Wright met me at the top of the stairs. She was 64 according to her website bio, though she could have passed for younger. Silver hair cut short, sharp gray eyes behind frameless glasses, navy suit. She shook my hand with a firm grip. "Mr. Flores, come in." Her office faced the street, large windows, organized desk, diplomas on the wall. She gestured to a chair and sat across from me, not behind the desk, making this conversational rather than formal. "Tell me about your relationship with your son. Not the legal facts, the truth. How often did you see him during his illness?" "Every week, sometimes twice a week. He was my only child." "Did you ever discuss the will with him?" "Never. I didn't know he'd changed it until Carmichael read it." She nodded, making notes on a yellow legal pad. "The will is dated February 28th. What happened in late February? Why would Brent suddenly disinherit his wife?" Carmichael mentioned Brent suspected something. Infidelity, financial irregularities. But I don't have proof. Then we find proof. Did Brent keep records? Computer files? Phone records? He had an office at the estate. I haven't been through it yet. Elizabeth leaned forward. "Here's what we're dealing with. This lawsuit," she tapped the complaint I'd brought, "claims undue influence and mental incompetency. But Brent was examined by his oncologist on February 27th. I checked. Medical records confirm cognitive function was unimpaired. The will was witnessed by 2 independent parties, neither of whom was you." She pulled out a highlighter, marked several sections of the complaint. "So legally she has no grounds if the will was properly executed," which it was. "But here's the problem." She looked up at me. "She can drag this through probate court for 2-3 years. She can freeze the business assets, file motion after motion, destroy your reputation through discovery depositions. Every friend you have, every colleague Brent had, she'll depose them all, ask about your relationship with your son, plant doubts. By the time you win, your name will be mud, and the business will be worthless. So what do? We don't wait for that. We go on offense. We find out what Brent knew, and we prove it." I sat back, processing. "You want to investigate her?" "I want to finish what your son started. If Loretta was stealing from the business, we find the transfers. If she was having an affair, we find evidence. We don't just defend this will contest. We file a countersuit. Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, theft. We make her the defendant instead of you." "Can we do that?" Elizabeth smiled. Not warm exactly, but determined. "Mr. Flores, I've been practicing estate law for 38 years. I've seen every trick, every manipulation, and I've never lost a case where the truth was on my side. If your son suspected wrongdoing, there's evidence. We just have to find it." She stood, walked to the window, looked out at the street. "Here's my concern. You said Brent died suddenly. Heart failure from the cancer. But he was stable, collecting evidence, planning to take action. Then his heart stopped, conveniently before he could prove anything." I felt cold. "You think—" "I don't think anything yet. I'm just noting the timing, which is why we need to move fast, before evidence disappears, before records get deleted, before witnesses forget or change their stories." She turned back to me. "So here's what I need. Full access to Brent's office at the estate. His computer, phone, any personal records, financial statements from the business, employee contacts who might know about irregularities. Can you get me that? The estate is legally mine now. I can get you whatever you need." "Good." She returned to her desk, wrote something on the legal pad. "We start with Brent's digital life, computer, phone, email accounts. If he suspected infidelity and financial theft, he would have looked for evidence. We find what he found, or what he didn't live long enough to find." She tore off the page, handed it to me. a list of items she needed. Can you get me access to his office at the estate? I need to see where he worked. Tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning. She extended her hand again. Mr. Flores, I'm going to tell you something I don't usually tell clients on the first meeting. I came out of semi-retirement to take this case. You know why? I shook my head. Because I'm tired of seeing decent people destroyed by gold diggers and frauds. Your son knew something was wrong. He took steps to protect what he'd built, and then he died before he could finish the job. That deserves better than watching his widow steal everything while destroying his father's reputation. She met my eyes. We're going to finish what he started, and we're going to make sure she pays for whatever she did. I left her office feeling something I hadn't felt since Loretta's phone call 2 weeks ago. Purpose. Not just grief, not just confusion, actual direction. The drive back to my house took 40 minutes through afternoon traffic. I kept replaying Elizabeth's words. We go on offense. We find proof. We make her the defendant. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the list Elizabeth had given me. Computer, phone, financial records, email accounts, everything Brent would have used to investigate his own wife. But there was a problem. Even if I had access to the estate, to Brent's office, his computer would be password protected, his phone locked, his email accounts secured. I couldn't hack those systems, didn't have the skills, didn't have the right. But I did have something else. Elena Vasquez, the private investigator I'd called after the funeral. She had those skills, or knew people who did. I pulled out my phone, found her number, sent a text. Need your help tomorrow. Computer forensics. Can you meet me at the San Diego estate at 9 a.m.? Her response came in 30 seconds. Address? I sent it. Then I sat back, looked around my small kitchen, the house I'd lived in for 20 years, the quiet suburban life I'd settled into after retirement. That life was over. Had been over since Loretta's cold voice on the phone. Brent died last night. Now there was only this. The investigation, the evidence, the truth, and whatever came after we found it. I thought about Brent in those final weeks. Weak but determined, investigating his own wife, changing his will, trying to protect what he'd built. He'd known something was wrong, had been gathering proof. Then his heart stopped. Tomorrow, I'd start where he'd left off. Find what he'd found. Prove what he'd suspected. And if there was more to his death than cancer, if there was something deliberate, something criminal, I'd find that too. Elizabeth was right. We weren't playing defense. We were going on offense. And I wasn't that confused, grieving old man Loretta had dismissed at the funeral anymore. I was a prosecutor again, and she'd just become my target. Elizabeth arrived at the estate the next morning, carrying a laptop case and a determined expression. I'd spent the night gathering what I could access. Brent's business files, bank statements I'd found in his desk, the laptop he kept at home. I'd barely slept, running through scenarios, questions. What had Brent discovered? What had he been afraid to tell me? Let's see what your son wanted us to find, Elizabeth said, setting up at his desk. Within 20 minutes, we had our first answer. She'd inserted a USB drive into Brent's laptop, running recovery software that scrolled through hundreds of deleted files. We watched the screen as file names appeared, one after another. Loretta Bank Transfers Skype, Offshore Research PDF, CA Adultery Law, .docx. Your son was investigating her, Elizabeth said quietly. Look at these search terms. Offshore accounts, adultery community property, invalidate inheritance California. He knew something was wrong. When did he search these? Most recent activity is February 26th, 2 days before he changed the will. I stared at the screen. Brent had been dying, barely able to walk from his bed to the bathroom, and he'd been using what energy he had left to investigate his own wife. Elizabeth clicked through the recovered browser history, pages about financial fraud, California state law, divorce proceedings. Each search was a breadcrumb, showing my son's growing suspicion, his determination to protect what he'd built. We need to verify what he found, Elizabeth said. These searches tell us what he suspected. We need proof of what actually happened. I stepped out of the office to make a call. Richard Moss, the estate attorney who'd first advised me, had connections beyond legal practice. I dialed his number. Richard, I need a favor. Unofficial, time sensitive. Financial audit for a private matter. Can you recommend someone who moves fast and stays quiet? A pause. How unofficial are we talking? Let's say I'm trying to avoid discovery until I have solid evidence. I know someone. She's expensive and she's thorough. Give me the company name. Flores MedTech Corporation. 2 years of transactions looking for irregularities. I'll make the call. 4 days later, Elizabeth and I sat in her office while Richard's contact, a forensic accountant named Patricia Chen, presented her findings. The report was bound, professional, devastating. Mr. Flores, your daughter-in-law has been systematically looting the company. Patricia's finger traced down columns of numbers. $2.3 million over 18 months, transferred to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Every transaction was authorized under her signature authority. Perfectly legal on paper, completely fraudulent in reality. Elizabeth leaned forward. Can we prove fraud? If you can prove the offshore accounts belong to her personally, yes. That's embezzlement. But you'll need bank records from the Caymans, which means subpoenas, international cooperation. We'll get them, Elizabeth said. What else? Patricia flipped through pages. The transfers were disguised as consulting fees and equipment purchases, all approved during periods when Mr. Flores, the deceased, was hospitalized or undergoing treatment. She waited for his vulnerable moments. I felt cold rage settle in my chest. While Brent was fighting cancer, struggling to survive, she'd been stealing from the company he'd built. Thank you, Patricia, Elizabeth said. We'll need you to testify when this goes to court. After Patricia left, Elizabeth turned to me. This is solid evidence, but we need more. The financial theft proves embezzlement. But in California, we can also pursue her for breach of fiduciary duty, if we can prove infidelity. Community property laws work in our favor. A spouse who commits adultery during the marriage can lose inheritance rights. How do we prove an affair? Elizabeth pulled out her phone, scrolled through contacts. I know someone. Marcus Webb, former SDPD detective, runs a private investigation firm now. He's expensive, but he's the best. We met Webb the next day in his office, a converted loft downtown. He was 60, built like someone who still hit the gym regularly, with sharp gray eyes that had seen too much. Elizabeth spread the evidence across his desk, the financial records, Brent's search history, our suspicions about Loretta's activities. I'll establish her patterns first, Webb said. Where she goes, who she meets, daily routines. If there's another person in the picture, I'll find them. Usually takes a week, maybe 2. We need documentation, Elizabeth said. Photos, videos, timestamps. Admissible quality. Webb smiled slightly. I know what courts need, counselor. 30 years SDPD, remember? 5 days into the surveillance, Webb sent encrypted files to Elizabeth's secure email. We watched on her office computer as the video played. A parking garage. Loretta's white BMW pulling into a space. A man approaching, mid-30s, fit, wearing gym clothes. They embraced. Not a friendly hug. A passionate kiss that lasted long enough to leave no doubt about their relationship. The video continued. More meetings. Her entering his apartment building, leaving 3 hours later, coffee shop encounters where they sat close, holding hands across the table. The timestamp showed a pattern, 3, sometimes 4 times a week. Webb's accompanying report was thorough. Subject, Loretta Flores. Secondary subject, Mark Taylor, age 39, fitness trainer at Elite Gym San Diego. Relationship patterns suggest long-term affair, not recent development. Social media analysis indicates interaction dating back approximately 14 months. I stared at the screen, watching Loretta laugh at something Mark said. 14 months. Brent had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 16 months ago. While Brent was dying, I said. Elizabeth's voice was quiet. While Brent was dying. In California, adultery during marriage affects community property rights. This changes everything. She paused the video on a frame of Loretta and Mark kissing. This is enough. We can file a counter motion, present the adultery evidence, potentially stop her lawsuit entirely. I looked at the photos Webb had provided, dozens of them cataloging the affair in painful detail. Loretta's face, mid-laugh, her hand on Mark's chest, the two of them entering his apartment, oblivious to surveillance. I thought of Brent, weak and struggling, still trying to investigate his wife, still trying to protect what he'd built. He'd known, he'd suspected, and he'd died before he could prove it. No, I said quietly. Elizabeth looked up, surprised. No? We don't show our hand yet. Let her think she's winning. I want to know everything. How long this has been going on? What else she's hiding? We keep digging. Elizabeth studied me for a moment. Something shifted in her expression. Recognition, maybe. Understanding that this wasn't just about winning a case anymore. This was about justice. Complete, thorough, undeniable justice. All right, she said. Webb continues surveillance. I picked up one of the photos, Loretta's face, mid-laugh, completely unaware she was being documented, and slipped it into my briefcase. The prosecutor in me, dormant for 15 years, was fully awake now, and the prey had no idea she was being hunted. We fell into a routine over the following weeks. 3, sometimes 4 evenings a week, I'd drive to Elizabeth's office after dinner, and we'd work until 9 or 10 o'clock, building our case brick by brick. Court filings, evidence cataloging, deposition preparation. Webb continued providing surveillance updates, more photos of Loretta and her fitness trainer, more evidence of the affair's duration. The financial audit was complete, documenting every fraudulent transfer. We had everything we needed, but somewhere between the legal strategies and documentary evidence, the conversation shifted. It started innocently, questions about whether I wanted regular or decaf coffee, then questions about family, about life before all this. And then, one evening in late April, Elizabeth closed the file we'd been reviewing and asked, "Can I ask you something personal? Not about the case, about you?" The office was quiet, just the two of us, desk lamp creating a pool of light, scattered documents surrounding us like evidence of our shared purpose. "Of course." She was silent for a moment, arranging her thoughts. "How did you survive it? Watching your son slip away, not just from the cancer, but before that. Watching him choose someone who you knew was wrong for him." I'd never talked about this, not with anyone. Badly at first. I tried to warn him gently. He accused me of being jealous, said I couldn't accept him having his own life. So you stepped back. What else could I do? Drive him away completely? I looked at my hands. I told myself if I gave them space, if I didn't interfere, eventually he'd see what she was. But then he got sick, and there wasn't time anymore, and I'll never know if... I stopped. Elizabeth's hand had moved across the desk, covering mine. Not a dramatic gesture, just a simple touch of comfort. "You couldn't have changed it," she said. "Some people see what they want to see until reality forces the truth on them. Believe me, I know." She pulled her hand back slowly, but the warmth lingered. "My husband left me for a paralegal in his firm," she said. 26 years old, fresh out of school. I was 54, and suddenly I wasn't enough. He took half of everything I'd built and started over with someone who made him feel young. "How did you survive it?" "Badly at first." A slight smile. Then I realized something. I didn't want someone who couldn't see my value. Throwing myself into work was easier than dealing with the loneliness. I took early semi-retirement because I was tired of watching happy couples and wondering what I'd done wrong. Turns out I wasn't the problem. "Neither was I said. "No, neither were we." The silence that followed was different from our usual comfortable working quiet. This was charged, aware. Elizabeth cleared her throat, shuffled papers. "We should probably. It's getting late." But the next evening we met for coffee instead of going straight to work. Then lunch a few days later. The conversations deepened. Her passion for hiking, her daughter's wedding last summer, my years teaching Brent to fish at the lake near our old house. You were a federal prosecutor for 30 years and you've never seen The Godfather? Elizabeth's tone was mock horrified. I smiled. I lived courtroom drama every day. Why would I watch it for entertainment? Because it's art, Morton. We're fixing this cultural gap immediately. The casual use of my first name, the teasing tone. I realized we'd crossed some invisible line without either of us acknowledging it. One afternoon, Elizabeth showed me a photo on her phone. Her daughter's wedding, her in a blue dress, smiling wider than I'd seen her smile in all our working sessions. We leaned close, looking at the screen together. I could smell her perfume, something subtle, professional. Our shoulders touched. Neither of us moved away. She looks like you, I said. She has her father's stubbornness, unfortunately. Elizabeth lowered the phone, but didn't pull back. We were inches apart, her eyes meeting mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt different, charged. Then her phone buzzed. She straightened, checking the message. The moment broken. It's my assistant. David Blank filed something. Emergency motion. She's bringing it over now. 20 minutes later, we read Blank's filing together. Improper relationship. Conflict of interest. Ethical violation compromising representation. The language was inflammatory, accusatory, designed to discredit both of us. Elizabeth's face flushed with anger. This is David Blank's specialty. When he can't win on facts, he goes after character. He's claiming we have an improper relationship that compromises my representation. Do we? She looked at me carefully. Have an improper relationship? Or do we have a relationship that David Blank is trying to make look improper? Both questions matter. Yes, they do. She set down the motion, rubbed her temples. I should recuse myself. It's the safe choice. I can refer you to another attorney, someone equally qualified. I looked at her across the desk, this woman who understood my pain, who'd helped me find my strength again, who'd become more than just my legal counsel over these weeks. Is that what you want? Her hand rested on the motion document, her professional armor firmly in place, but her eyes revealed something else. What I want, she said slowly, and what's right aren't always the same thing. I stood, preparing to leave for the evening. The late hour, the accumulated tension of weeks working together, the weight of Blank's accusations, it all pressed down on us. Then we need to decide which matters more. I moved toward the door, then paused, turned back. For what it's worth, Elizabeth, I haven't felt this clear-headed in years. You don't compromise my judgment. You sharpen it. I left her there, sitting alone in her office, the motion on her desk between us like a challenge. Outside, I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. The evening air was cool, the street quiet. Through her window, I could see Elizabeth still at her desk, reading the motion again, weighing her options. Professional safety or personal risk, legal propriety or human connection. I understood the dilemma. I was living it too, this unexpected feeling of coming back to life after years of numbness, of isolation. Meeting someone who saw me not as an old man, not as a retired prosecutor, living on memories, but as someone with value, someone worth knowing. Loretta had tried to diminish me, had called me a powerless pensioner, irrelevant, easily dismissed. But Elizabeth saw something different, and I saw her, not just the competent attorney, but the woman who'd survived betrayal and built herself back stronger. I started the car, pulled away from the curb. Behind me, the light in Elizabeth's office stayed on. Tomorrow, she'd make her decision. Tomorrow, we'd face whatever came next. But tonight, driving home through empty streets, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not just for justice against Loretta, not just for winning the case. Hope that maybe, at 68, life still had surprises left. Good ones. The hearing was set for the first week of May. Elizabeth filed her response to Blank's motion, a 20-page brief that addressed the improper relationship claim directly while pivoting to the evidence we'd gathered against Loretta. She'd decided not to run from the accusation, but to meet it head-on, then demonstrate through her preparation and advocacy that our friendship strengthened rather than compromised her representation. I spent that week in strange preparation, reviewing potential testimony, organizing documents, mentally returning to courtroom space I'd inhabited for 30 years. But this time would be different. This time, I wouldn't stand at the prosecution table directing the case. I'd sit at the defendant's table, trusting someone else to fight for me. The morning of the hearing, I put on my courtroom suit, charcoal gray, slightly tight across the shoulders after 3 years of retirement, and knotted my tie. Elizabeth met me at the courthouse steps. We entered together. The smell hit me first, old wood and floor polish, the particular scent of legal proceedings that I'd forgotten until that moment. The probate courtroom was smaller than the criminal courts I'd known, but the weight was the same. Judge Patricia Hendricks presided from the bench, 60-something, silver hair, the expression of someone who'd seen every manipulation tactic in probate litigation. Elizabeth squeezed my arm briefly before opening her briefcase with practiced precision. We took our seats at the defendant's table. Across the aisle, David Blank arranged his documents with theatrical flair, Loretta beside him in conservative black, playing the wronged widow. "Let's begin," Judge Hendricks said. "Mr. Blank, your motion to disqualify counsel." Blank stood, gestured broadly. "Your Honor, the evidence shows an unconscionable relationship between attorney and client. Ms. Wright and Mr. Flores have been seen together repeatedly at restaurants. Spending evenings alone in her office." He pulled out photos, apparently of us at lunch. "This goes beyond professional representation. It compromises Ms. Wright's judgment and creates ethical violations that demand her removal from this case." Judge Hendricks looked at Elizabeth. "Ms. Wright?" Elizabeth stood calmly. "Your Honor, Mr. Flores and I have developed mutual respect and friendship during this representation. I won't apologize for treating my client as a human being rather than a case file. My judgment remains sound, my advocacy vigorous, and my ethics intact. Mr. Blank has presented innuendo, but no evidence of impairment." The judge studied both attorneys for a moment. "Mr. Blank, you've presented innuendo, but no evidence that Ms. Wright's representation has been compromised. Attorneys and clients are human beings who sometimes form friendships. Unless you can demonstrate actual impairment of judgment or ethical violation, this motion is denied. Ms. Wright remains counsel of record." Blank's jaw tightened. He sat down, whispered something to Loretta. "Now," Judge Hendricks said, "let's address the will contest itself." The next 2 hours were methodical demolition. Blank called witnesses, a neighbor who'd seen my car at the estate frequently, a distant acquaintance who claimed I'd been hovering over Brent during his illness. Each testimony painted me as predatory, manipulative, taking advantage of my dying son. Elizabeth's cross-examinations were surgical. "Mrs. Patterson, you testified you saw Mr. Flores visit his son frequently. Did you ever witness any of these visits?" "No, but I saw his car." "So you don't know what occurred during these visits?" "Well, no, but—" "Did you know that Brent Flores called his father every Sunday for 20 years before his illness?" Silence. "Let me rephrase. You're testifying about frequency of visits, but have no personal knowledge of their nature or content, correct?" "I suppose." Elizabeth presented medical records from Brent's oncologist, documenting his cognitive function was unimpaired through February 28th, the day he signed the will. Robert Carmichael testified about the will execution, confirming Brent's clarity of mind, his deliberate choices, his specific instructions. Then Elizabeth made her move. "Your Honor, the defense has focused on Mr. Flores's relationship with his dying son. I'd like to redirect attention to Mrs. Flores's relationship with someone else during that same period." She pressed a button. The courtroom screen flickered to life. The photograph was large, undeniable. Loretta and a younger man kissing in a parking garage. The timestamp read January 15th, 2025. The courtroom went silent. Collective intake of breath. "This is Loretta Flores with Mark Taylor, taken on January 15th of this year. Brent Flores was alive, undergoing chemotherapy. The affair had been ongoing for over a year." More photos. Loretta and Mark embracing, entering his apartment building, sitting close at a cafe, holding hands. I watched Loretta's face drain of color. Blank leaned over, whispered urgently. Your Honor, Elizabeth continued, in California, adultery during marriage affects community property rights and inheritance. Mrs. Flores wasn't the devoted wife caring for her dying husband. She was conducting a long-term affair while planning to inherit his estate. Loretta stood abruptly in the gallery. Those photos are misleading. Mark was helping me through a difficult time. He was a friend when I needed support. Elizabeth's expression didn't change. A friend you bought a $15,000 Rolex for using marital funds? She held up financial records. A friend you texted, I can't wait to feel your body against mine while your husband was in hospice? She held up phone records. Mrs. Flores, adultery isn't just morally reprehensible, it's legally relevant. Loretta sat down abruptly, face flushed. Blank stood quickly. Your Honor, I request a recess to consult with my client. Judge Hendricks looked at the evidence displayed on screen, then at Loretta, then back to Blank. We'll take a 30-minute recess. Mr. Blank, I suggest you consult with your client about whether continuing this litigation serves her interests. The gavel struck. The courtroom erupted with murmured conversations. I watched Loretta and Blank huddle in urgent whispered conference, her hands gesturing frantically. Elizabeth packed her evidence binders methodically, her face professionally neutral, but she caught my eye, a moment of shared understanding. I stood, needing air. The hallway was crowded with people from the gallery, reporters with notebooks, curious observers, and there, standing against the far wall, watching me with an expression of pure hatred, was a man I recognized only from surveillance photos, Mark Taylor, the fitness trainer. He'd come to court. Our eyes met across the crowded hallway. He pushed off the wall and walked toward me deliberately. Mark Taylor crossed the courthouse hallway with deliberate strides, his expression a mixture of anger and something else. Fear, maybe, or desperation. I'd seen his face only in surveillance photos until now, frozen moments of intimacy with Loretta. In person, he was younger than I'd realized, probably not even 40, wearing expensive workout gear like armor. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to be confrontational, far enough to avoid causing a scene that might bring courthouse security. You happy now? His voice was tight, controlled. My face is all over those photos in court. My name's going to be in every news report. You've destroyed my reputation, my business. Clients are already canceling. I looked at him steadily. 30 years as a prosecutor taught me when to stay silent. Let the subject talk themselves into corners. Your reputation? I kept my voice calm. My son is dead. Mark's anger deflated slightly. I didn't know how sick he was at first. She said they were separated, practically divorced. But you learned the truth? Yeah, I learned. He looked away, jaw working. You think you know what she is? You don't know half of it. She talked about him like he was already dead, counted his money while he was still breathing. Before I could respond, Elizabeth emerged from the courtroom. She read the situation instantly, stepped between us with professional authority. Mr. Taylor, I'm Elizabeth Wright, Mr. Flores' attorney. If you have something to say that's relevant to this case, we can discuss it properly. Otherwise, you should leave. Mark looked at her, then back at me. Something shifted in his expression, calculation replacing anger. She manipulated me, too, he said. Told me we'd be together once he was gone. Showed me financial documents, talked about the company valuation, said just a few more months and we'd be free. Elizabeth's posture changed subtly. Recognition of opportunity. Mr. Taylor, let's talk somewhere quieter. She guided him to a corner of the hallway, away from the crowd. I followed, watching her work, the tone both empathetic and firm, creating psychological space for him to turn on Loretta. Did Loretta ever discuss her husband's estate with you? His finances? Mark hesitated. Yeah. She talked about what would happen after, showed me documents about his company, the valuation, said when he died we could finally be together, be comfortable. Did she ever specify a timeline? She kept saying just a few more months or soon, like she was counting down. Elizabeth glanced at me, then back to Mark. Do you have any documentation of these conversations? Text messages? Emails? Mark pulled out his phone, hands shaking slightly. He scrolled through texts, his face showing disgust as he reread them. I should have seen it, the way she talked about him, like he was an obstacle, not a person. He handed Elizabeth his phone. She photographed screens methodically, screenshot after screenshot of messages between Mark and Loretta. I moved closer, read over her shoulder. A little more time and he'll die. Then we'll be free and rich. The message was dated February 20th. Brent had still been alive, still fighting. She wrote that while he was fighting to live, I said, my voice tight. Mark avoided my eyes. I know how it looks. I should have ended it then. Elizabeth looked up from the phone. Mr. Taylor, I need you to provide a sworn statement and copies of all communications with Loretta Flores. In exchange, I'll recommend to Mr. Flores that we have no interest in pursuing any claims against you personally. You were involved with a married woman, which is morally questionable, but you didn't commit any crime. She's the one who stole from the company and betrayed her dying husband. What happens to her? That's for the court to decide. Mark nodded slowly. I'll do it. I'll give you everything. We drove to Elizabeth's office. Her assistant stayed late to help prepare documents. Mark signed a sworn declaration, the notary stamping it official. Elizabeth attached authentication certificates to the text message evidence, drafted an emergency motion to introduce supplemental evidence. I watched her work with focused intensity, assembling the pieces of Loretta's destruction. The text messages were devastating, not just the one about waiting for Brent to die, but dozens more showing Loretta's cold calculation, her discussions of inheritance timelines, her casual references to Brent's declining health, as if it were an inconvenience rather than a tragedy. Can we use this? I asked. Will the judge allow it? Elizabeth reviewed Mark's statement one more time. It goes to character, to her true intentions. This isn't just adultery anymore. This is evidence of predatory behavior, of counting her husband's money while he was dying. The judge needs to see who she really is. Will it be enough? It's more than enough. It's devastating. She hit the file button on the electronic court system at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the midnight deadline. We sat in silence for a moment, exhausted. The office was quiet, just the hum of computers and distant traffic. The judge will have this first thing tomorrow morning, Elizabeth said. When court reconvenes, Blank won't know what hit him. I picked up one page from the stack of file documents. Mark's declaration, authenticated messages, motion to introduce supplemental evidence. Read Loretta's text again. A little more time and he'll die. Then we'll be free and rich. I set it down carefully. She counted the days, I said quietly. While Brent was fighting for his life, she was counting the days until he'd die. Elizabeth didn't respond. There was nothing to say. I stood, preparing to leave. What time tomorrow? 9 o'clock. Same courtroom. I nodded, moved toward the door, then paused. Elizabeth, thank you. For seeing what I couldn't see. For giving me the weapons to fight back. She looked at me across the desk. This woman who'd become more than just my attorney, who'd helped me find strength I'd thought was gone. We finish this tomorrow, she said. I left the office, drove home through empty streets. But I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, looking at the framed photo of Brent, thinking about those text messages. A little more time and he'll die. Loretta had written those words while Brent struggled to breathe, while he underwent chemotherapy, while he fought with every ounce of strength to survive. She hadn't just betrayed him. She'd waited, calculated, counted down to his death like it was something to celebrate. Tomorrow, the judge would see it all. Tomorrow, whatever sympathy Loretta might have claimed as a grieving widow would evaporate in the face of her own words. Tomorrow, justice would be complete. But tonight, I just sat with my son's photograph and felt the weight of what we'd discovered. Not just theft, not just adultery, but something colder and more calculated than I'd imagined possible. I returned to the courthouse the next morning with less than 4 hours of sleep. The images from Mark Taylor's phone, those text messages, Loretta counting down days to Brent's death, had played on repeat behind my closed eyelids. The city was waking up around me, commuters heading to office buildings, food trucks setting up on corners, construction crews beginning their day. But I felt removed from all of it, suspended in this legal limbo where my son's memory and legacy hung in the balance. Elizabeth met me at the courthouse steps, her expression telling me she'd slept as little as I had. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. Neither of us spoke about what ready meant. Ready to win, ready to watch Loretta's final defeat, ready to close this chapter. Maybe all of it. We climbed the courthouse steps together. Inside, the courtroom felt different. Yesterday's tension had crystallized into something harder, more final. Loretta sat with David Blank, and I barely recognized her. Makeup smudged, hair less perfect than usual. Her hands trembled as she whispered urgently to her attorney, who looked professionally resigned. Judge Hendricks entered. We stood. "I've reviewed the emergency filing submitted last night," she began, looking directly at Blank. "Your objection is noted, but overruled. The text messages between Mrs. Flores and Mr. Taylor are relevant to her character and state of mind during the period in question. Mrs. Flores cannot claim surprise about communications she herself authored. The evidence will be admitted." Blank started to respond, but the judge continued. "Having reviewed all evidence presented, I find the will, dated February 28, 2025, to be valid. Brent Flores possessed testamentary capacity and was not subject to undue influence." My chest tightened. Elizabeth's hand found mine briefly under the table. "Furthermore," Judge Hendricks said, her voice hardening, "evidence of Mrs. Flores's adultery during the marriage disqualifies her from community property rights under California law. The will is upheld in its entirety." Loretta made a small sound, not quite a gasp, more like air being forced out. "Additionally, evidence of financial misappropriation totaling $2.3 million requires referral to the district attorney for investigation of potential criminal conduct." Blank stood quickly. "Your Honor, may we request a brief recess to consult with my client?" 30 minutes. The gavel struck. Blank pulled Loretta into a courthouse conference room. Through the window, I watched them, his hands gesturing, explaining, probably telling her what I already knew. She'd lost everything. The question now was whether she'd face criminal charges too. Elizabeth and I waited in the hallway. She reviewed notes, prepared for whatever came next. I just stood there, feeling strangely empty. This was victory. Complete, total victory. So why did it feel hollow? When we reconvened, Blank stood with the careful posture of someone about to surrender. "Your Honor, my client wishes to avoid further litigation. We propose a comprehensive settlement. Mrs. Flores will return all disputed funds to Flores MedTech Corporation, release any and all claims to the estate, and accept appropriate restrictions. In exchange, Mr. Flores agrees not to pursue criminal charges or civil damages beyond restitution." Judge Hendricks looked at me. "Mr. Flores, do you wish to consider this proposal?" I glanced at Elizabeth. She nodded slightly, not telling me what to decide, just confirming it was my choice. "Yes, Your Honor." We moved to the conference room. Morton and Loretta sitting on opposite sides of the table for the first time since the funeral. She wouldn't look at me. Blank and Elizabeth hammered out terms while we sat in silence. Elizabeth leaned close, whispered, "You don't have to accept this. You could push for criminal prosecution. She stole from Brent's company while he was dying, and spend the next 3 years in depositions and trials, watching her face, hearing her voice." I shook my head. "No, I want her gone. Completely gone from my life. This does that. Then we accept. We accept." The settlement took 90 minutes to finalize. Elizabeth wrote notes in her precise handwriting. Blank tried to salvage anything for his client. He got nothing. Comprehensive release, return of all funds, restraining order preventing her from contacting me or interfering with company operations, her signature on documents waiving all rights to Brent's estate forever. Back in the courtroom, the court reporter brought the documents, placed them in front of Loretta. Blank pushed a pen toward her, Her hand hovered over the signature line for a long moment. I watched her face, saw the recognition that signing meant accepting total defeat. No inheritance, no company, no legacy from the man she'd betrayed. She signed. Each page turned with a sound that seemed loud in the quiet courtroom. "Your Honor," Blank said, "the settlement has been executed. Mrs. Flores has signed all documents, including the comprehensive release and acknowledgement of terms." Judge Hendricks nodded. "Very well. This matter is concluded. Mr. Flores, the estate is yours to administer as specified in your son's will. Court is adjourned." The gavel struck. Final. Absolute. Loretta stood quickly, not looking at anyone. She walked rapidly toward the exit, Blank following. But at the door, she paused, hand on the doorframe, shoulders tense. For a second, I thought she might turn back, might say something. She didn't. The door closed with a soft click of finality. People began filing out, reporters seeking comment, court staff clearing paperwork. Elizabeth gathered documents into her briefcase. I remained seated, staring at the empty space where Loretta had been. Finally, I stood. "What now?" Elizabeth asked. I looked around the empty courtroom, the place where justice was served, where Brent's will was upheld, where Loretta was defeated. "Now," I said, "I need to go to the estate. Brent's office. There's work to do." "Want company?" I considered, then nodded. We left the courthouse together, walking past the cluster of reporters. Elizabeth gave brief, no comment, while I stayed silent. We got into separate cars with plans to meet at the estate. I drove through San Diego streets, morning becoming afternoon. The weight of victory settled over me, not triumph, but responsibility. I'd won. Completely, decisively, won. Now I had to decide what to do with what I'd won. August brought heat and clarity. 3 months had passed since the courtroom victory. 3 months of transformation that felt both rapid and gradual. I'd spent that time learning my son's business from the inside, meeting with department heads, reviewing product pipelines, understanding the medical technology company Brent had built from nothing. The work was demanding, but purposeful. I'd moved into his office, not immediately, but gradually, first visiting to sort through files, then working from his desk occasionally, finally accepting that this space was mine now, along with the responsibility it represented. Elizabeth had been integral to the transition, helping navigate corporate legal structures, advising on governance questions, and, somewhere between contract reviews and strategic planning sessions, becoming much more than my attorney. We hadn't announced anything formally. We didn't need to. People saw us together at business functions, noticed the easy partnership, drew their own conclusions, and for the first time in years, I didn't mind being seen. Now, on a warm August afternoon, we sat in my office reviewing architectural plans for something I'd been developing for weeks. "The Brent Flores Foundation," Elizabeth read from the blueprint mock-up. "Morton, this is beautiful." "It's what he would have wanted," I said, "not just preserving what he built, but expanding it, growing it into something that helps people the way he wasn't able to be helped. The foundation would provide financial assistance to families dealing with cancer treatment costs, fund pancreatic cancer research, support hospice care, $10 million as initial endowment, Brent's company helping people through medical technology, the foundation extending that mission to direct patient support." "I keep thinking about those last months," I said, the fear in his eyes. "If this foundation can ease that fear for even one family, it's worth everything." Elizabeth's hand touched my shoulder. "This is the right way to honor him." That evening, I presented the foundation concept to the company board. Standing at the head of the conference table, Brent's former position, I explained the mission, the funding structure, the projected impact. "I'm establishing the Brent Flores Foundation with a $10 million endowment," I said. "Its mission will be supporting families dealing with cancer treatment costs and funding pancreatic cancer research. Brent built this company to help people through medical technology. The foundation extends that mission to direct patient support." My voice caught slightly when I said, "the Brent Flores Foundation," first time speaking the name aloud publicly. I found Elizabeth's expression across the room, drew strength from it, continued. It's what he would have wanted. The board approved unanimously. Afterward, one of the board members approached me. Mr. Flores, we're all pleased to see you've found partnership, both professionally and personally. Elizabeth's guidance has been invaluable during this transition. I glanced at Elizabeth. She's been invaluable in more ways than corporate restructuring. Sometimes the best things emerge from the worst circumstances. Later that week, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Elizabeth and I drove to the cemetery. I'd been visiting weekly since May, routine I'd established, something grounding in the chaos of transformation. Elizabeth had asked to join me. We walked through the grounds, following the familiar path to Brent's headstone. I carried a small bouquet, the weekly ritual that helped me feel connected. At the grave, I placed the flowers carefully, stood in silence for a moment, Elizabeth staying slightly back to give me space. Son, I said quietly, I did what I promised. Justice prevailed. Loretta got nothing, and she'll never benefit from what you built. I paused, organizing thoughts. The foundation launches next month. Your name will help people. Your legacy continues. Another pause. I found someone, Brent. Elizabeth. I think you'd have liked her. She's principled, strong. She helped me fight for you when I didn't know how. The longest pause yet. I miss you. That doesn't change. But I'm okay now. Finally, okay. Elizabeth moved closer, taking my hand. We stood together in comfortable silence. You come here every week? She asked eventually. Every Sunday. It's become my routine. Want to join me next time? I'd like that. But Morton, he's not here. You know that, right? He's in the foundation, in the company, in your memories, not just here. I squeezed her hand. I know, but I'm not ready to stop visiting yet. Maybe someday. No rush. We have time. We walked back to the parking area, slowly. Elizabeth asked what I wanted for dinner, and I suggested trying that new restaurant she'd mentioned weeks ago. Normalcy. Domesticity. Life continuing. We drove separate cars but agreed to meet at my place, the suburban house I'd kept despite inheriting Brent's estate. I didn't need the mansion's size or luxury. This space was mine, filled with my memories, now ready for new ones. Elizabeth's car pulled up behind mine in the driveway. As she walked toward me, I thought about the journey from that cold phone call in March to this warm August evening. Brent was gone. That truth didn't change. But I was still here. And after everything, the betrayal, the battle, the victory, I'd found something I didn't know I was looking for. A reason to keep living fully, not just existing. Justice had been necessary. The courtroom victory, Loretta's defeat, the money returned, the will upheld, all of it mattered. But love, purpose, meaningful work, these were what made justice worth achieving. These were what transformed survival into living. Loretta had tried to reduce me to nothing. An old pensioner, powerless, irrelevant, easily dismissed. She'd been wrong about everything. I was 68 years old. I'd lost my only son. I'd fought the hardest battle of my life. And I'd won. Not just in court, not just financially. I'd won back myself, my purpose, my future. Elizabeth reached me, and together we walked toward the house. The door closed behind us. Through the windows, lights came on as evening fell, warm glow against gathering darkness. Inside, there would be dinner, conversation, companionship. Tomorrow, there would be work, foundation business, company decisions, meaningful action. Next Sunday, there would be flowers at Brent's grave. Every Sunday after that, too. The grief remained, would always remain, but it no longer dominated. It coexisted with purpose, with love, with the dailiness of building something good from something terrible. Loretta was gone. Left San Diego, left my life, irrelevant now. Mark Taylor had disappeared too. Their story was over, finished, no longer worth thinking about. My story continued. Brent's legacy continued. The foundation would help families, fund research, ease fear for people facing what we'd faced. That was enough? More than enough. It was everything. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.